Imagine, right, like someone coming in and saying, I'm going to save the U.S. government $1 trillion. You'd probably think, wait, is this some kind of like crazy sci-fi movie plot?
Yeah, it does sound a little far-fetched, doesn't it?
It does. But, well, it's not totally fiction.
Today, we're going deep into DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency.
D.O.G.E.
Yeah, DOGE. It's this, well, temporary advisory body, and it's honestly caused a ton of debate, a lot of curiosity, all that. It's like a total crash course on a really complex, and let's be honest, really talked about part of what's going on right now.
For sure, for sure. And we've got the Dan-splainer on the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, right here. That's going to be like our guide, our roadmap as we figure out what this whole DOGE thing really
Exactly.
Our mission, simple. We're cutting through all the noise, the confusion, and giving you the clear, essential stuff you need to get DOGE without getting lost in all the government jargon.
Absolutely.
So let's start simple. What is DOGE, like at its core?
Okay, so DOGE, right? It's a temporary advisory body, essentially a task force.
Okay.
The big thing to remember here is, like, despite the name, despite Elon Musk being involved, DOGE's power is all about persuasion. That's it.
Gotcha.
It started back in January 2025 through an executive order from President Trump.
Right.
Now, just so everyone's on the same page, an executive order is basically the president saying, this is how things are going to be within the executive branch. It carries the force of law, you know, and yeah, Elon Musk is the one leading this whole thing.
Elon Musk leading a government initiative, that's definitely going to turn some heads.
For sure.
So where does DOGE fit in, like, in the whole government structure?
Well, it's under the newly repurposed United States Digital Service.
Okay.
They renamed it the United States DOGE Service, but it's still USDS for short.
USDS.
Right. And this USDS, it falls under the Executive Office of the President.
Okay.
Their current mandate is set to end by July 4th, 2026, unless they extend it, of course.
Right.
And this is really, really important to remember. DOGE advises, it recommends, but it can't actually make any changes directly. They have no real power to implement anything.
Okay, so temporary advisory, Musk's leading it. What's the goal? What problem are they trying to solve here?
Efficiency. That's the big one. They want to make the federal government work better, basically.
Okay.
So finding where money's wasted, streamlining how things operate, modernizing all the technology and systems they use.
Yeah.
You know, like old software or clunky processes that are costing taxpayers way more than they should. That's what DOGE is supposed to be looking into.
Makes sense. So it's not just Musk and a handful of people like sitting in a room just brainstorming, right?
No.
There's a structure to this whole thing.
Absolutely. Musk is kind of like the advisor at the top, but he's got a whole team.
Okay.
And here's the interesting part. Every single federal agency had to create its own little DOGE team internally.
Really?
Yeah, at least 4 employees each. These agency-level teams are supposed to work with, coordinate with, the main DOGE group. But, and this is key, DOGE's legal power comes from that executive order. That's it.
Okay.
It's not like a law passed by Congress or, you know, a formal cabinet-level department where they report directly to the president and are more permanent.
Right. So we've got this broad goal of efficiency, teams in each agency. What are they actually doing? What's on their to-do list?
Well, their mandate's pretty broad. It covers almost everything the government does.
Wow.
But it comes down to 3 main things.
Okay.
First, technology and software modernization.
Okay, so like updating stuff.
Yeah, they're checking out the government's IT infrastructure, like the hardware, the software used in different agencies, and recommending upgrades.
To what, make things work better?
Exactly, better and cheaper.
Makes sense.
And part of that is finding the really old systems that are probably costing more to keep running than to just replace altogether. I mean, think about it. We've all been frustrated with like clunky government websites.
Oh, absolutely. Been there, done that. What's the second area?
Cost-cutting recommendations.
Okay.
That's all about examining budgets, doing audits to find any fraud, waste, or abuse, and then suggesting where they can cut back on spending, maybe even eliminate some things entirely.
That's like a big job.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
But, and this is crucial for everyone listening, these are just suggestions. DOGE can't actually cut a single dollar from the budget.
What's the third responsibility?
Personnel and workforce streamlining.
Okay, what does that even mean?
Basically, they're looking at how many people work in each federal agency and figuring out if they can reduce the workforce or maybe just move people around to make things more efficient.
So looking at the tech, the money, and the people. And this covers a whole bunch of government entities, right?
Well, a ton.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be working across a lot of different federal agencies. Our source material specifically mentions Treasury, USAID, and the Department of Education as examples. But again, they can only recommend, not enforce. Like, they can't just walk into the Treasury Department and start making cuts themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this brings us to a really important question. What can DOGE actually do?
Right.
Because advisory sounds a bit vague, you know?
Yeah, it can be. It's really important to understand that their power is all about suggestion and coordination. That's it.
Okay.
So they could do things like conduct audits of how agencies are running, produce detailed reports pointing out inefficiencies.
Okay.
They can formally propose reforms, suggest specific cuts, or changes to how things operate.
Yeah.
Those proposals go to the agencies themselves and to the president.
Okay.
And of course, they work with those agency-specific DOGE teams we talked about, gather info, try to get everyone on the same page.
So lots of analyzing, proposing ideas. But what's even more important for us to understand, I think, is what they can't do. What are the limits on their power?
That's where a lot of the confusion comes in. So DOGE cannot implement any of those cuts they recommend. No way.
Oh.
They can't just decide to lay off federal employees. They don't have the power to shut down programs or whole agencies.
Yeah.
And here's the big one. They can't enforce anything. If an agency ignores their suggestion, DOGE can't make them do anything about it.
Oh, wow.
And maybe most importantly, they have zero control over the federal budget. That's Congress's job.
So just to be clear, if they say, get rid of this program, it's a waste, where does that suggestion go and who actually decides?
Well, it goes to the agency running the program, maybe to the president. But the final decision, especially if it involves money, has to come from Congress. They control the purse strings.
This is actually really helpful because, you know, the name Department of Government Efficiency, you'd think they have the power to just be efficient.
Right.
But it sounds like they're more about pointing out where things could be better and suggesting those improvements to the people who can actually do something.
Exactly. And that difference between what people think DOGE can do and what they actually can do, that's a big reason why there's so much controversy around them. There are some major misconceptions out there.
Let's unpack those then. Clear things up for everyone listening. What are the big misunderstandings about DOGE?
Okay, so the first one is all about Elon Musk's power. Because he's so well known, and he's made some pretty ambitious claims about potential savings, like that $1 trillion figure.
Yeah, the trillion thing.
People just assume he can waltz in and make huge changes.
I mean, you see the headlines, you hear the numbers. It's easy to think he's got, direct control.
Exactly. But the reality, as we've talked about, is that he's an advisor. He can suggest all he wants, but he can't implement anything himself. The power still lies with the agencies, the president, and Congress.
Right.
The source actually points out that Musk's fame and those big savings figures have probably led to people overestimating his real authority.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's the other big misconception?
That DOGE is a real, permanent government department. The name Department of Government Efficiency is a big part of this, I think.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
People probably assume it's like the Department of Defense or Homeland Security.
Right.
Permanent, powerful, legally established.
It's not.
Nope. It's temporary, it's advisory, a task force. It doesn't have the resources, the permanence, or the legal weight of a cabinet-level department.
Yeah.
The source actually says the name itself is a big source of confusion. Kind of ironic, given how little power they actually have.
Yeah, it is. So those two misconceptions about Musk and about DOGE's status, that's really fueled the debate around this whole thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. Critics point to these perceived power grabs as red flags, even though their actual mandate is much more limited.
Okay, so we've got a clearer picture of what DOGE is supposed to do, what they can't do. What about what they've actually done? What are they reporting? What kind of impact have they had?
That's where things get a little murky. They're definitely reporting progress, saying they've found areas for improvement, but how accurate are those claims? How big of a deal are they really? That's still up for debate.
Let's go back to the numbers for a second.
Yeah.
We mentioned Musk saying they could save $1 trillion, but the source also mentions a $16 billion figure on the DOGE website. That's a huge difference.
Right. That discrepancy, $1 trillion versus $16 billion, it kind of shows the gap between the big goals and the maybe more realistic outcomes. Critics are saying that trillion-dollar figure is just speculation. There's no real evidence to back it up.
Okay.
The $16 billion is more specific, but even that's being questioned. Some independent analyses say the real savings are probably way lower.
Mm-hmm.
And there are also concerns about whether some of these proposed cuts could actually hurt essential government services.
So it's not just about saving money. It's about what happens because of those savings.
Exactly.
What are some of the specific areas DOGE has focused on?
Well, technology is the big one, which makes sense given their mandate. They keep saying these outdated IT systems are a huge waste of money, and they're recommending lots of upgrades.
Okay.
They've also looked at foreign aid, specifically U.S. aid, and the Department of Education, and proposed cuts to both.
I bet that's caused some controversy.
Oh, yeah. Tons of debate about the long-term effects of those cuts.
Makes sense.
And, of course, they've suggested personnel reductions across different agencies, which has led to worries about people losing their jobs and potential disruptions to those services.
Right, right. And there have been questions about how DOGE operates too, right? Like how transparent they are.
Definitely. There's been criticism about how little public information there is about their activities, their findings. Plus, some members of the DOGE team apparently don't have much experience working in government.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so people are questioning if they really understand how complex the federal government is.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the whole conflict of interest thing with Elon Musk's businesses being tied to government contracts.
Right.
All this lack of transparency has fueled a lot of skepticism about how objective they are, how accountable they are.
So we've got this advisory body causing a lot of discussion, raising some big questions.
For sure.
Now, the source also mentions times when DOGE might have actually gone too far, overstepped their advisory role.
Right.
That sounds like a problem.
It could be. Despite their limited powers, there have been a few instances where they've been accused of going beyond their mandate and stepping on the toes of other parts of the government.
Let's get into those specifics. The first one is about access to sensitive data. What happened there?
Well, apparently, DOGE staff got access to some pretty sensitive data in the Treasury Department's payment systems.
Really?
And to the IT infrastructure of agencies like the Department of Energy. This led to lawsuits,
Mm-hmm.
and the courts actually had to step in and limit some of that access.
Wow.
They were worried about privacy and security violations. Critics said this was way beyond just advising. It was infringing on the independence of these agencies.
Yeah, accessing those systems does sound like overreach. What's the next example? It says something about trying to shut down agencies.
Right, so DOGE recommended basically shutting down USAID and drastically cutting funding for the Department of Education.
Bold move.
Yeah, and it was met with immediate legal challenges. The courts ended up reaffirming that only Congress has the power to defund or eliminate federal agencies.
So DOGE can't just try to shut things down through their recommendations.
Nope, that authority belongs to Congress, not to an advisory body.
Okay. What about the third instance of potential overreach? It mentions pressure on personnel and contracts.
Yeah, so there were reports that DOGE was pressuring agencies to lay off employees or cancel contracts.
But they don't have the power to enforce any of that, right?
Exactly, which is why a lot of people saw this as a problem. Labor unions and the people whose contracts were being threatened, they sued. They argued that DOGE was trying to wield power it just didn't have.
So accessing data, trying to shut down agencies, pressuring people and contracts. Sounds like there's been some pushback.
Oh yeah, big time. Lawsuits from unions, NGOs, even members of Congress. The main arguments are that DOGE is messing with essential government functions and that it's violating the separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches. And the courts have stepped in a few times to limit what DOGE can do, basically reinforcing their boundaries as an advisory body.
Okay, so bringing it all together, it seems like DOGE is this really interesting, maybe even unprecedented attempt to make the government more efficient.
Right.
Big mandate led by a huge name. But their actual power to make those changes is really limited.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember that DOGE is, at its core, a temporary advisory body. They're focused on tech, spending, personnel, all big things. But their success depends entirely on whether the agencies, the president, and Congress actually take their advice.
Mm-hmm.
And, as we've talked about, there's a lot of confusion about what DOGE can and can't do, especially when it comes to Elon Musk's role.
For sure.
The debate boils down to this. Are they making real positive changes, saving money? Or are they causing more trouble than they're worth with all this lack of transparency and potential overreach? It's a perfect example of the struggle to balance government efficiency with how power works in Washington.
So as DOGE keeps going, the big question is, can an advisory body actually make a real difference in a system as huge as the federal government? Or are they just as simple, showing how hard it is to actually make government work better?
That was a deep dive into the Department of Government Efficiency. If you found this informative, make sure to subscribe to Dan's Plane for more in-depth explorations of complex topics.
And for the latest episodes, articles, partner products, and more, visit us at www.dansplain.xyz. Thanks for listening.